Sunday dinner had barely started when my son pushed a stack of retirement community brochures across my kitchen table and said, "Dad, you need to start thinking realistically." I looked at the glossy covers, smiling gray-haired couples on walking trails, a swimming pool, a dining room with white tablecloths. One brochure had a picture of a man holding a golf club, like retirement was one long Saturday morning. I laughed. About what Jason didn't laugh back. He was 42 then, sitting across from me in the same chair he'd used through most of high school. His wife Emily was beside him. Their daughter Megan was picking at her mashed potatoes, and Tyler, 12, had suddenly become very interested in his dinner roll. Jason pointed vaguely around the room. "This. The house. Everything." I waited. He rubbed one hand over his jaw. "You can't expect me to take care of this place forever." I stared at him. "When exactly did I ask you to?" Nobody moved. Even Tyler stopped chewing. Jason leaned back in his chair. "Come on, Dad. No, you know what I mean. I really don't." He sighed the way people do when they think they're being patient with you. That irritated me more than the brochures. "Dad, you're 66. This house is too much. Too much for who?" He glanced toward Emily. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. Jason said, "Eventually me." That was the moment I understood this wasn't really about gutters or lawn care. He had been thinking 5 years ahead, maybe 10. And in whatever future he had built in his head, I had apparently become a project. I put my fork down. "There it is." Jason frowned. What is? "You're not talking about my life. You're talking about what you're afraid my life might eventually do to yours." Emily finally spoke. "Bob, I don't think he means it like that." I looked at her. "How does he mean it?" Jason sat forward. "I mean, I'm trying to be realistic." He picked up one brochure and tapped it with 2 fingers. "You think this stuff gets easier? Last month I cleaned your gutters. Before that I helped with the fence. I drove you home from the garage. I moved that dresser downstairs. I spent an hour fixing your online banking, resetting a password, whatever." I almost laughed again, but his face stopped me. He wasn't joking. To me, those were ordinary things. I had driven 2 hours to pick Megan up from a volleyball tournament the year before when Jason got stuck at work. I had helped him replace a garbage disposal. I had watched their dog for a week while they went to Hilton Head. Nobody kept score. At least I didn't think we did. I said, "You cleaned my gutters once." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" "The point is every year there's going to be more." His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was tired. That bothered me in a different way. I had seen tired on him before. Jason worked long hours as an operations manager for a distribution company outside Columbus. Megan was looking at colleges. Tyler played travel baseball, which seemed to require either a second mortgage or a private sponsor. I knew his life was busy. I just hadn't realized I was on the list of things wearing him down. I looked past him toward the window over the sink. The backyard was dark, except for the porch light. Diane had picked that light fixture 23 years earlier because she said the old one made the house look like a gas station. She'd been gone 4 years. Some days that still didn't sound right. This house had been ours since 1991. We raised Jason here. We hosted Christmas here. Diane had planted the maple near the back fence herself. Now my son was sitting at her kitchen table telling me the place had become too much. I said, "If you were worried about me, you could have asked me what I wanted." Jason shook his head. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do." "No. You brought brochures because you won't think about it." "How do you know?" He opened his mouth, then stopped. That answer never came. Dinner ended about 15 minutes later. Nobody wanted dessert. Emily hugged me before they left. Megan did too. Jason stood near the front door with his coat on. "I'm not trying to get rid of you." "I didn't say you were. You're acting like I am." I looked at him. "And you're acting like I already need somewhere to be put." His face tightened. "That's not fair." "Maybe not." I opened the door, but neither was Sunday dinner. He left without answering. I watched their taillights disappear down the street, then locked the door and went back to the kitchen. The brochures were still sitting where he had left them. For a while, I just stood there looking at them. Then I looked around my house, at the stairs, at the old cabinets, at the hallway light I'd been meaning to replace. And for the first time since Diane died, I wondered whether Jason saw this place differently than I did. I saw home, Maybe he saw a warning. By Monday morning, I was still angry. Not the kind of angry that makes you slam cabinets or call somebody just to keep the argument going. Mine was quieter than that. I made coffee, carried it to the back porch, and sat there looking at the yard while the neighborhood woke up. A school bus stopped at the corner. Somebody 2 houses down started a leaf blower before 8, which should probably be illegal in Ohio. I kept hearing Jason's voice. Every year there's going to be more. I hated the way he'd said it. But sometime around my second cup of coffee, another thought started bothering me. What if there was a little truth underneath all that bad delivery? The house wasn't tiny, just under 2,000 square feet, 2 stories plus a basement. Diane and I had bought it when Jason was 7 because we wanted more room and a decent school district. Back then, stairs were just stairs. A big yard meant space for a swing set and cookouts. 35 years later, the stairs bothered my right knee if I made too many trips carrying laundry, and the yard had somehow doubled in size without moving an inch. I still handled it. That part mattered to me. I drove myself wherever I needed to go. I paid my own bills. I cooked. I grocery shopped at Kroger every Thursday morning, mostly because that was when the store was quiet, and the produce didn't look like it had survived a bar fight. But Jason wasn't wrong about everything. I did call him first. When the fence leaned after a storm, I called Jason. When I bought a used dresser from a woman in Westerville and realized I had no business carrying it down basement stairs by myself, I called Jason. When I forgot my online banking password and got locked out after too many attempts, I called Jason. At the time, none of it felt significant. He was my son. Who else was I supposed to call? That question sounded reasonable until I asked myself another one. Why did it always have to be him? I could have hired somebody for the fence. I could have paid 2 college kids $50 to move the dresser. The bank had a customer service number printed right on the back of my debit card. I hadn't been helpless. I had just taken Jason's availability for granted. That realization didn't make the brochures any less insulting. But it did take some of the heat out of my anger. Later that afternoon, I drove to Lowe's for a furnace filter and ran into Charlie Benson near the plumbing aisle. Charlie and I had worked together at the same insurance office for almost 20 years before we both retired. He took one look at me and said, "You look like somebody canceled golf." "I don't golf." "Then you look worse than I thought." I told him what happened. Not every word, just the basic version. "My son thinks I need to start planning for the future." Charlie nodded. "That seems reasonable." He brought brochures. Charlie winced. "Ah, at dinner. Worse." Then he told me he couldn't take care of the house forever. Charlie picked up a package of faucet washers and studied it like it contained the meaning of life. Finally, he said, Does he what, take care of the house?" "No." Charlie looked at me. "Does he help?" I started to say no. Then I stopped. Sometimes. How often that annoyed me. "You taking his side?" "I'm buying faucet washers, Bob. I don't have a side." I laughed to spite myself. Then Charlie said something that stayed with me. "Jason ever tell you no?" I thought about it. "No. Maybe that's part of the problem." I frowned. He had a problem. He could have said something. Sure. Charlie tossed the washers into his cart. But some people are lousy at saying they're overloaded until they're already mad about it. That sounded exactly like Jason. It also sounded a little like me. That evening, I thought about his life more carefully. Megan was 17 and touring colleges. Tyler's travel baseball schedule looked like a regional airline timetable. Emily had complained recently about their insurance deductible going up. Jason had been working late more often, and a few months earlier, he had mentioned a coworker named Mark, whose mother had fallen and broken her hip. Mark had spent weeks juggling work rehab appointments, grocery runs, and paperwork. Jason had told me about it more than once. At the time, I barely paid attention. Now I wondered if he had been paying too much attention. Maybe every gutter password and ride home had started connecting itself to Mark's future in his head. That didn't excuse what he did, but it explained why he might have done it. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to punish Jason. I wasn't going to call him and announce that I never needed him again. That would have been childish. But I was going to stop making him my automatic answer to every small problem. If something broke, I'd hire someone. If I needed a ride, I'd find one. If Jason really felt like I was becoming another responsibility on his list, I wanted to remove that pressure. At least for a while. What I didn't realize was how strange our relationship would feel once I did. The first test came 3 days later. It rained hard Thursday night, and Friday morning I noticed water spilling over one corner of the gutter above the garage. Normally I would have texted Jason. Nothing dramatic. Probably something like, "You free Saturday, I think that gutter's clogged again." Instead, I stood in the driveway looking up at it. I owned a ladder. I also knew exactly what Diane would have said if she were still around. "Robert Miller, if you climb that thing at 66 to save $100, I'll kill you myself." I went inside and called a gutter cleaning company. They came Monday. $145. The young man who did the work was maybe 25 and went up that ladder like gravity was optional. Worth every penny. The following week, the brakes on my Ford Escape started making a noise I didn't like. I took it to the same garage on Indianola Avenue I'd used for years. Usually Jason would pick me up. This time I ordered an Uber. My driver was a retired middle school principal named Gloria, who spent the entire ride telling me why 7th graders were the most dangerous people in America. I tipped her $5. By the time we reached my house, I was in a better mood than I would have been riding home with Jason complaining about traffic. The lawn came next. I had always done most of it myself, but July humidity in central Ohio can make 20 minutes outside feel like you're mowing underwater. I hired a local service to come twice a month. Then I called a handyman about the loose basement railing. None of these decisions changed my life. That was the point. There were plenty of ways to solve ordinary problems without automatically reaching for my son. Jason noticed sooner than I expected. One Tuesday evening, my phone rang. "Hey, Dad." "Hey." A pause. "Everything okay?" "Sure. You haven't called much." I smiled. "You're calling me right now. You know what I mean." I did. He asked about the car and I told him the brakes were fixed. "How'd you get home, Uber?" Another pause. "You could have called me." There was something almost funny about hearing that. "I know. And the gutter's clean. You got up there yourself?" "No. I'm trying to age responsibly, remember?" He didn't laugh. "Who did it?" I had wanted to show him that I wasn't dependent on him. Instead, I had made him feel excluded. And if I was being truthful, I felt it too. I missed the little calls. Not because I needed free labor, because sometimes a loose railing was an excuse to see my son on a Saturday morning. That was the part neither of us had understood. Still, I wasn't going back to the way things had been. If Jason was worried about my future, then maybe I needed to take a harder look at it myself. So I did. I called my financial planner, Linda Kaplan, and scheduled an appointment. I also contacted a contractor who specialized in aging-in-place renovations. A week later, a man named Doug Harris walked through my house with a clipboard. He pointed out things I'd never considered. The upstairs bathroom had a tub I might eventually hate climbing into. The hallway lighting could be better. The downstairs den could become a bedroom if stairs ever became a problem. None of it meant I needed to renovate tomorrow. It meant I had options. Then I did something I hadn't expected. I opened Jason's retirement brochures. I actually read them. One community had walking trails, a woodworking shop, transportation to medical appointments, and apartments that looked more like condos than anything I associated with old folks' homes. I still wasn't interested, but I wasn't offended by the idea anymore. Someday, maybe. What bothered me was never the possibility of leaving my house. It was somebody else deciding I ought to. A few days later, Doug returned with preliminary estimates. We spread his plans across my kitchen table on Saturday morning. I was asking about converting the downstairs den when I heard a car door outside. A minute later, my front door opened. Dad Jason walked into the kitchen. He looked at Doug, then at the floor plans, then at the folder from Linda sitting beside them. His face changed. "What is all this?" Before I could answer, he picked up one of the pages. His eyes went straight to the section labeled Long-Term Housing Options. He looked at me. "You're selling the house. You're selling the house." Jason said it so quickly that Doug stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. "No," I said. Jason looked down at the papers again. "Then why does this say long-term housing options?" "Because apparently I'm allowed to have options." He gave me a look. Doug cleared his throat. "I can come back another time. That's probably best," I said. I walked him to the door, thanked him, and promised I'd call after I reviewed his estimate. When I came back, Jason was still standing at the kitchen table. He had found the bathroom drawings. "What are you doing to the downstairs, thinking about turning the den into a bedroom eventually?" "Why? Because if my knee gets worse someday, climbing stairs 12 times a day might not be the smartest hobby." Jason lowered the paper. You told me this house wasn't too much. It isn't, but you're changing it because you can't manage it. No, I'm changing it so I can keep managing it. That shut him up for a second. I poured myself another cup of coffee. Want one? No. Suit yourself. He kept going through the papers. There were estimates for a walk-in shower and better bathroom lighting, notes about handrails, a printout Linda had given me comparing the approximate cost of staying in the house with hiring more help versus downsizing later. Jason looked genuinely confused. When did you start doing all this? Some of it this month. I tapped Linda's folder. Some of it 4 years ago. His eyes came up. 4 years after your mother died. That changed his expression. I had met with Linda 3 months after Diane's funeral. Back then, I wasn't worried about grab bars or lawn services. I was trying to figure out what one retirement income looked like instead of two. Over the years, Linda and I had talked about the house more than once. What it was worth. What I still spent maintaining it. How long my savings could support me if I eventually needed paid help. Whether downsizing at 75 might make sense. I had never told Jason much of that because there had been nothing to announce. It was planning, not a decision. I pulled out another folder. I've also got an appointment next month to update my will and healthcare directive. Jason stared at me. You never told me. You never asked. The words came out sharper than I intended. He put the paper down. So Sunday was what, some kind of test? No. You've been sitting on all this while I'm worried about what's going to happen to you. That irritated me. Jason, you walked into my house with brochures because you assumed I hadn't thought about any of it. Because every time something goes wrong, you call me. That doesn't mean I haven't planned for my future. It sure doesn't make it look like you have. I leaned against the counter. You were so busy preparing to take care of me, you never bothered asking whether I'd already started taking care of myself. Jason looked away. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. He turned back. Okay. You want me to ask questions? Here's one. I waited. Who did you call when the fence came loose? I knew where this was going. Jason. Who you? The dresser. You. Your car was at the shop. You. The bank locked you out. You helped me reset a password. That's not the point. There was that sentence again. But this time, I let him finish. You keep saying you never asked me to take care of you. Fine. You never sat me down and said, Jason, take care of me. His voice had dropped. But whenever something goes wrong, I'm your first call. I folded my arms. You could say no. I know. Then why don't you? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time since Sunday dinner, neither of us had an easy answer. Finally, he pulled out a chair and sat down. I don't know. That sounded more honest than anything either of us had said all week. I sat across from him. After a moment, he added, maybe because Mom always called me too. That caught me off guard. Diane had computer trouble, heavy boxes, Christmas lights, anything involving a ladder. After she died, I had simply continued the habit. Somewhere along the way, Jason had become the family's default helper without any of us discussing it. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of my coffee mug. I didn't realize it felt like that. Jason nodded. And I didn't realize you'd already done all this. He gestured toward the papers. We weren't reconciled, not yet. He still thought I had ignored how much I leaned on him. I still thought he had crossed a line by trying to manage my future. But the argument had changed. It was no longer about which one of us was right. It was about how two people who loved each other had managed to make assumptions for years without saying them out loud. And I was beginning to suspect those brochures hadn't really started with me at all. I found out about Mark 2 days later. Not because Jason told me. Charlie did. We were having coffee at a Panera near Worthington after an early morning walk, and I was telling him about the conversation in my kitchen. So now I'm confused, I said. He's worried I'll need him too much, but when I stop calling, that bothers him too. Charlie stirred his coffee. Sounds like a son. That's helpful. I try. I told him what Jason had said about being my first call. Charlie listened, then asked, you ever figure out why he suddenly got so worked up about this? I know he's busy. That's not what I asked. I thought about it. Then I remembered Jason talking about his coworker. There's a guy at his job, Mark. The details came back slowly. Mark's mother had fallen in her kitchen the previous winter. At first, everybody thought it would be a few weeks of inconvenience. It wasn't. There was surgery, rehab medication, transportation insurance paperwork. Mark's father was still living at home but had stopped driving at night and apparently wasn't handling things well alone. Mark started leaving work early, then missing full days, then using vacation time for medical appointments. Jason had mentioned once that Mark was answering calls from a rehab center during a management meeting. At the time, I had said something like, "That's rough." Then I changed the subject. Charlie looked at me. "You think Jason watched that and started seeing his future?" I sat back. Maybe. Once the thought entered my head, a lot of things started fitting together. Megan had college coming. Tyler's baseball team seemed to travel every other weekend. Emily's insurance plan had changed, and their out-of-pocket costs were higher. Jason had told me his company was short 2 supervisors. He wasn't drowning, but he was carrying enough that the idea of adding an aging parent probably felt different from where he stood. That evening, I called him. He answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, Dad, got a minute?" "Sure." I could hear traffic through the phone. "You driving?" "Just pulled into the driveway." "Then sit there a second." He laughed softly. "What did I do now?" "No, I wanted to ask you about Mark." Silence. "Then what about him?" I asked whether what happened to Mark's family had anything to do with Sunday dinner. Jason didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Finally, he said, "Some." "How much is some?" He let out a long breath. "Dad, the guy's exhausted." Jason told me more than he ever had before. Mark had used nearly all his paid time off. His sister lived in Arizona, so most of the daily responsibility had landed on him. His mother was improving, but now his father needed more help too. "He told me last month he hasn't had dinner with his wife before 8 o'clock in weeks," Jason said. I listened. Then he said something quieter. I kept thinking, what happens if that's me in 5 years? There it was. Not resentment. Fear. Jason continued before I could answer. "Megan could be in college. Tyler will still be at home. Emily and I are already running all over the place. And then I started thinking about your house. So you bought brochures." "I know. That was quite a leap." "I know that too." There was almost a laugh in his voice, but it disappeared quickly. I didn't know how to say it without sounding like a terrible son. Say what that I don't know if I could do everything. That hurt. Not because I expected everything. Because my son had apparently spent months believing that one day I might. I looked around the living room, at the lamp beside Diane's old chair, at the family pictures on the mantel. "Jason, I never wanted that from you. I know that now." "No, I'm not sure you do." I paused. "But I'm starting to understand something too. What I made it easy for you to think I expected you to show up every time." He didn't argue. The next morning I met Charlie again, this time at a diner we'd been going to for years. After I told him about the call, he buttered his toast and said, "So problem solved?" "No." "Good." I stared at him. He shrugged. "Problems that took 10 years to build shouldn't disappear after one phone call. Makes the rest of us look bad." I laughed. But he was right. I didn't want to prove I could live without Jason anymore. I wanted him to know that when he helped me, it was because he chose to. And I needed to learn to ask instead of assume. A week later, my phone rang at 7:12 on a freezing Thursday morning. "Jason," I answered. "Everything okay?" There was a pause. Then my son said, "Dad, my furnace is making a noise, and I think the guy they sent out yesterday is trying to sell me a whole new system." For the first time in weeks, Jason was the one who needed help. "What kind of noise?" That was the first thing I asked. Not, "Do you want me to come over?" Not, "What did you do?" Just the noise. Jason tried to imitate it over the phone. It sounded like a washing machine full of silverware. "That tells me absolutely nothing," I said. "Glad I called. Did the furnace quit?" "No. It's running. The technician said the heat exchanger might be cracked and I should probably replace the whole system." "How old is it?" 11 years. "And what did he quote you?" Jason hesitated. "Just under 10,000. I sat up straighter. "Did he actually show you a crack?" "No." "Did he test it?" "I assume so." "Don't assume." There was a time I would already have been putting on my coat. Instead, I gave Jason the number for Tom Reynolds, an HVAC contractor I'd used twice over the years. "Call Tom. Tell him you want a second opinion. Ask him to inspect the heat exchanger and explain exactly what he finds. Okay. And don't authorize a replacement until you have something in writing. Jason was quiet. Then he said, "You sure you don't want to come over?" I smiled. "You need me to?" Another pause. "No." "Then call Tom." That afternoon, Jason texted me. "You were right." I stared at the message for a moment before answering. "I'll need that notarized." He called immediately. Tom had inspected the system and found the heat exchanger intact. The problem was with the blower motor assembly. It still wasn't cheap, but it was nowhere near $10,000. Jason sounded relieved, then annoyed. "I almost bought a furnace I didn't need." "That's why God invented second opinions. I thought doctors invented those." "Same department." He laughed. 2 days later, he showed up at my house carrying 2 large coffees from Tim Hortons. "No brochures?" I asked. "Left them in the car." I stepped aside. He handed me one of the coffees. We sat at the kitchen table. For a while, we talked about the furnace, then Megan's college applications, then nothing. Jason turned his cup slowly between his hands. Finally, he said, "I think I started looking at you like a countdown." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He stared down at the lid. "Like every year there'd be a little less you could do, and a little more I'd have to handle." I didn't say anything. He continued, "Mark's situation got in my head. Then every time you called, I started connecting it to that. A fence became assisted living." He gave me a tired smile. "Pretty much. That's quite an imagination." "I know." I took a drink of coffee. Jason looked around the kitchen. Then he said, "The stupid part is the minute I didn't know what to do with the furnace, who did I call?" I raised my hand. "Local senior citizen." He laughed. Then his expression changed. "I forgot that part." "What part that you're still my dad?" Simple sentence, but it landed harder than anything else he'd said. For weeks I'd been trying to prove I wasn't a burden. I suddenly realized how much I hated that word. People aren't either useful or burdensome. Diane had taught me that without ever saying it. During her last year, there were things she couldn't do anymore. I drove her more, cooked more, handled appointments, but she was still the person I went to when I was worried about Jason, or when I couldn't decide whether to retire, or when I needed somebody to tell me I was being an idiot. Needing help hadn't erased what she still gave me. I looked at my son. "One day I probably will need more from you." Jason nodded. "I know. And one day you might need more from Megan and Tyler." He smiled slightly. "Tyler can't remember to put milk back in the refrigerator." "I'm not optimistic. That kid may be your retirement plan. Then I'm doomed." We both laughed. It was the first time the subject of getting older hadn't felt like a threat between us. But there was still something we hadn't said. Jason had explained his fear. I had admitted some of my habits. Neither of us had actually apologized, and those brochures were still sitting in my house. The following Sunday, I invited Jason, Emily, and the kids over for dinner. Before they arrived, I took the brochures out of the drawer. I placed them right in the middle of the kitchen table. This time, I was the one who wanted to talk. Jason noticed the brochures before he even took off his coat. He looked at them, then at me. "Oh no." Emily came in behind him carrying a casserole dish. What Jason pointed toward the table. "Dad brought out the evidence." I smiled. "Relax. Nobody's being arrested." Megan laughed. "Tyler asked if we were eating soon." That helped. The first Sunday dinner had felt tense almost immediately. This one started normally. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans. Tyler told me about striking out twice and then hitting a double. Megan had narrowed her college list to 4 schools. Nobody mentioned retirement. After dinner, the kids went into the living room. Emily started gathering plates, but I stopped her. "Leave those a minute." Jason looked at me. I pulled one of the brochures closer. "We should probably finish this." Emily sat back down. Jason rubbed his hands together. "Okay, I wasn't interested in another argument. I had spent the week thinking about what I actually wanted him to understand. So I asked one question. When you brought these over, were you trying to get me out of this house?" "No." His answer came immediately. "I wasn't trying to get rid of you, I know." Jason seemed surprised. Maybe he had expected me to make him defend himself all over again. I didn't need that anymore. "So what were you trying to do?" He looked toward the living room where Tyler was laughing at something on television. Then he said I was scared of what Jason leaned forward, elbows on the table. That one day you'd need everything from me and I wouldn't be able to give it. There it was. No gutters, no fence, no house. Just a 42-year-old man afraid that someday his father might need him more than he could handle. Jason kept talking. I watched Mark run himself into the ground, and I kept thinking about Megan going to college, Tyler still being homework, the mortgage. He shook his head. And then you'd call about something, and I'd think, what happens when it's 5 things? What happens when it's every day? I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, you should have told me you were scared. I know. Instead, you made a plan for my life. He looked down. I know that too. His apology wasn't dramatic. That made me trust it more. I'm sorry, Dad. Bringing those brochures here like the decision was already made was wrong, and saying the house would eventually be my responsibility. He stopped. That was worse. Yes, I said. It was. Emily gave me a small smile. I wasn't going to make it easier for him by pretending it hadn't hurt, but I had something to admit too. I probably should have stopped treating you like my first call for every little thing. Jason looked up. You can still call me. I know. I mean it. I know that too. I tapped the table once with my finger. I just want it to feel like a call, not an assignment. Jason nodded slowly. That's fair. So we made a plan. Not a 10-year master plan with charts and deadlines. Just some rules. I'd hire professionals for routine maintenance and anything involving ladders, heavy lifting, or jobs I had no business doing myself. If I needed Jason, I would ask whether he had time instead of assuming Saturday belonged to me. And Jason agreed to something that seemed harder for him. He would say no when he needed to. No guilt. No keeping score. As for the future, I showed him the paperwork Linda and I had prepared. I explained the bathroom changes I was considering, my financial plan, and the possibility that I might downsize eventually. Jason listened this time. He didn't tell me what I should do. He asked questions. That difference mattered. At one point, Tyler wandered into the kitchen and picked up a brochure. Grandpa, this place has pickleball. I saw that. Do you play? No. He looked confused. Then why would you live there? Jason started laughing so hard he had to cover his face. Even I couldn't argue with Tyler's logic. When they left that evening, Jason paused at the door. You okay? I'm 66, Jason. Not 96. He grinned. I know. Then I added, but ask me again in 30 years. He hugged me. It wasn't some grand reconciliation. We still had habits to change. I still had pride to swallow. Jason still had to learn that worrying about somebody didn't give him authority over them. But for the first time, we weren't arguing about a future neither of us could see. We were finally talking about it.